I'm going to tell you the story about arriving in New York City when I first got out of school. I arrived in New York City, and my impression of the city was that it was a wonderland, that it was a city that was built on change. I remember seeing on the corner where I lived on East 86th Street with my two roommates, a newspaper stand on 86 and Lex go in and out of business probably 7 times within the 2 years I lived there. And I thought, whoa, this is one hell of a city. It thrives on change. I realized in no due course that the city was the kind of town that valued the newcomer above all. They didn't give a damn who you were, where you were from. Most importantly, they wanted to know what you could do for me lately. And so the thing that I did for the city lately was start a small rental company with myself and the help of a $1,000 loan from my boyfriend. 7 years later, after I had started the company, I had a team of 14 salespeople. I call them salespeople. They were all renting apartments. But something strange was happening in the city. The middle class was moving over to make room for the upper class, the rich people moving into town. The co-ops, the condominiums were converting into co-ops, tens of thousands of them in any given year. And more importantly than all of that, my business, my world around me was changing because my boyfriend, for whatever reason at that point in my life, seemed like the big deal in my life, was trading me in for a young girl, my very young and beautiful secretary. And luckily for that change, I was able to start a second business called the Corcoran Group. It was born out of the change of that year. And in that year, when I started the business, I decided right from the get-go I was not going to have rental agents anymore because the city was sending me a different message. I was going to have salespeople that sold co-ops. There was also an animal in town with the biggest mouth you ever heard from, something the Witch of Likes I had never seen, and his name was Donald Trump. And he was selling a new building in town above the Bonwit Teller building that he constructed, a tall black building, a sexy building, and he called it Trump Tower. And he was trumpeting it as the most expensive address of the entire world. And much to my surprise, he attracted hundreds of people from Europe, from Asia, to come in and buy this new oddball kind of thing that we had never heard of called the condominium. And so I followed Mr. Trump's lead and started hiring people who spoke different language. New immigrants that didn't know how to sell, getting them licensed, and hoping they would drag their relatives and friends into my offices, and that's exactly what I did. In the mid-'80s, of course, there was no internet. And there was no public information on real estate in New York City because there was no multiple listing service, which the rest of the country enjoyed. And so there was a vacuum in the market for information that people wanted. And so I published a Corcoran report. It was simply a one-page report that added up 11 sales I had for the year, averaged them out, and gave an average New York City sale price. In my own naivety, I didn't realize then that that was not a valid average. But I published it, and I appeared on the front page of the vulnerable, whatever you call it, that word, New York Times. And it put me on the map, gave me a voice in my industry, and started pushing the growth of my business way ahead of what I could even keep up with, because I had a bigger voice and I actually had a company. But I became the expert in my industry, and that started building my brand at rapid speed. By the mid-'80s, companies that had only had 30 people that were considered huge real estate brokerage companies like Douglas Elliman and Brown Harris Stevens had staffs of 300 people, and it seemed overnight. Well, I had maybe 100, 120 people, and I realized I was falling behind and could never catch up to the big guys. These big brokerages were amazing, but what I realized their vulnerability was they all looked and sounded alike, and nobody really gave a damn what the differences were. And so I decided to put my face, whoop, I moved to, sorry, not so good at this, bear with me, ignore this slide. I decided to move ahead and put my face on everything that I could possibly advertise. Little tiny faces in the New York Times Classified, big billboards when I eventually grew and could afford it. And I found that people remembered our brand and we stood out from the pack, and that also continued to grow the business because it was right for the time in a city with huge companies where there was no personalization. Then later in the 80s, everything changed in New York. I never thought a big city like ours could fall, but the stock market crashed. Interest rates went to 18%, and people stopped buying, just stopped. And we had no sales, not one sale for 8 months, and I was clearly going out of business. I owed $350,000 to Citibank, $200,000 to the ad agency, scared to death. And then I thought about it and thought, what does this city need in this terrible market, and why aren't people buying? because there's no deadline. Things aren't going up, things aren't coming down, and I realized that buyers like to move when things are moving. And so I created movement in the market by taking 88 apartments owned by Equitable Insurance Company, convincing them that we should price all the one-bedroom studios and two-bedrooms alike, high floors, low floors, apartments with views and no views. Let's price them alike and have a one-day, one-price sale. And that was the last slide you saw there that I zoomed by. That was the sale that brought 350 people to see in 1 hour the 88 apartments. Every one of them sold, and I had $1.5 million, a little more than that, in my pocket to spend in the worst real estate market, paying off my debt and opening 2 new offices. In the early 90s, I realized that people were confused finding property. The New York Times classified section spanned 18 pages. Just to read every little ad and figure out what you wanted to even go see was impossible. And so I put all of my apartments on something called a videotape. I thought it was so sexy. I called it HOT, Homes on Tape, hot. I thought this was the amazing thing. And I spent $77,000 of my $102,000 first profit that year blowing it on these videotapes, and it was dead on arrival. And so looking for a place to save face in front of my salespeople with my sales meeting coming up, I was talking to my husband, Bill. He had just come back from South Korea where he played war games as a Navy captain. He said, this year it was amazing. We bombed out the North Koreans in real time. We pressed the button, they blew up. You know, this is what they do with our tax money. And all the guys are screaming and yelling. And he goes, this new government thing, so it's called the internet. And so I announced to my salespeople we were taking our apartments into cyberspace, simply trying to save face. And we were going to put all those videos into cyberspace, and I registered the URL Corcoran.com. And within the first month, the first week we had it up online. These old apartments, most of them already sold. Boom, boom, we had 2 sales out of London. Sight unseen, people bought an apartment. And I realized I had just stepped into the big kahuna that was going to cause more change to the real estate market than anyone could even imagine. And so I registered all my competitors' URLs, 17 of them to be exact, because you could do it then. Not because I wanted to own them or control them, but I wanted to find out when they would wake up to this new thing, knowing they would have to call me. And one by one they called me and asked for their URLs back. And do you know the largest competitors call the latest, proving that the little guy has the corner on creativity when the big guy has the corner on money. And the little guy caught on first, and those were the businesses that started to build and become my new competitors, not the big guys at the top. I sold my business on the Friday night before 9/11. I think it was God intervention, just had me sign that deal that night, thank God. And that was the end of my real estate chapter. I said goodbye to that, looked for a new job, and figured I'd go into the TV business, and that's what I did. And as luck would have it, after 4 years of failing at everything I did, I got a great invitation from a show called Shark Tank that they were going to try out for just 3 months on ABC. I signed up for it, and I became a shark on this new TV show. It failed for the first 2 years, was constantly being threatened to cancel until the 3rd year. And what did I get from Shark Tank? A new opportunity in living. What I got was the opportunity to see people like myself, young versions of me, starting all kinds of businesses and having the opportunity to be actually an investor and help them get there. I knew it was for me. And so what did I do with my people? I did the same thing I did with all my agents and managers at the Corcoran Group. I insisted they have fun. And so I knitted them together, pie companies, technology companies, you name it, we had it. 27 companies in total. And I made sure I never bought into an entrepreneur who wasn't willing to change. And how did I cause that change with my entrepreneurs? The same way I made change happen at the Corcoran Group. Because I had learned that if you can cause fun in the workplace, take people out of their comfort zone, make them feel ridiculous, look silly, be silly, make them drink too much, whatever the hell you have to do to shake them up, what really happens is they become an innovative team. I was looking for fun in my business. What I got instead was not only fun, which is the best part of living. I mean, who would actually die and say, I'm regretful I had so much fun, right? But what I got for the fun making that I was very, very good at, the more bizarre, the better it was. And these are supposed to be running on their own, and they're not, so we'll see if we could find them. There they come. Let's keep our fingers. Yeah, we got it. parties where you couldn't be let in unless you dressed in pajamas or cross-dress or dressed as 1950s, whatever you had to do. Picnics where you didn't have hot dogs, but we had camels, elephants, hot air balloons, 15 racehorses in full garb. Whatever could shock people. Come as dressed as a nun. That was not a big hit, but at least I tried it. But it's really weird to see 700 people dressed as nun at the Waldorf Astoria, believe me. All right. Everything to make my people have fun. And that's exactly what I do with my entrepreneurs on Shark Tank. I get them to wrap their arms around change. And how do I create that environment? By making sure they stay loose as a goose, willing to see what's coming their way, and switch high, left, right, whatever they have to do to accommodate the change, because that is the secret sauce, the fun that makes people accept change. It just wires them that way. And that's what I've done for these entrepreneurs. Today I sit on Shark Tank, and each shark there has some advantage over the other. It's a money advantage, it's intelligence, a financial advantage. Everybody's got something. The only advantage I have is I know how to build a team. And so I've knit these people together to build a team on the basis of fun. And that's all I do for these people. But as a result of it, I have some hugely profitable businesses, and much more important than that, I am having the best time ever, because I have many, many more people to play with, and thank you for listening.